The scene on Last Stand Hill in the very dying moments of the battle must have been horrific. 200 men of the 7th Cavalry lay dead and wounded. Many of the wounded, incapacitated with arrows, would most likely have watched their comrades get clubbed, hacked, or stabbed to death while they waited for their turn to die. Later, the Sioux women would move through the dead, hacking off heads and limbs, piercing eyeballs and ears with arrows, as they believed the dead would forever walk in eternity blind or deaf or crippled. It's against this tortured background that this story begins. For a long time, the Crow have told stories of seeing spirits wandering on the battlefield. The sightings were so numerous, the Crows called the cemetery superintendent Ghost Herder, because they believed that when he took his flag down at dusk, the ghosts would rise and walk around the area, only leaving when the flag was raised again at dawn. In recent times, many visitors and park workers have told tales of sightings and strange happenings. Some visitors reported hearing the sound of hundreds of native warriors charging on horseback when they were alone in the cemetery. Others reported walking through unexplained freezing cold spots on the battleground when the weather was very warm. On Last Stand Hill, many report being overcome by a sense of deep sorrow and loss. One visitor to the battlefield had a vision, and he said he watched the whole battle unfold before him while standing on a hill. Even though the actual real time of the vision was over in moments, he watched the whole battle from the beginning to the gory end. Another time, a park ranger alone at dusk on the hill reported feeling a cold rush go through him, and then hearing voices softly talking on the breeze. It had scared him so that he had to leave. In the 1980s, a Crow ranger was out on the ground at dusk performing a task when she stopped to better see two warriors on horseback with shields, bows silhouetted on the ridge. The ranger said, "One sat up high to take a better look at me." She watched until dark. In the morning, she returned to the place she had seen the warriors but could find no trace of where the horses or their riders had been. The stone house, built in 1894 as a residence for the superintendent of the cemetery, is a hotbed of unnatural occurrences. At one time, the basement was used to store bodies before they were buried in the cemetery there. Recent residents of the stone house have heard footsteps on stairs at night, and rangers have seen the lights go on at night when no one was staying there and the switches were off. One strange event in the 1980s happened when a new park employee was housed in the upstairs apartment of the stone building. The first night he was there, he woke up to someone pulling him out of bed. He reached for his Colt .45 he had left on the nightstand, and then watched in fright as a torso of a soldier moved through the air and into the other room, missing its head and legs. Again in the 1980s, an employee was returning equipment to the visitor center when he entered a back room and saw a soldier standing in the shadow, thinking it was a fellow worker playing a joke. He pretended not to see him and played along to see what would happen next. Then, as he was returning items to a shelf, expecting the soldier to jump out of the shadow to scare him, he watched the soldier out of the corner of his eye walk back out straight through the closed door. Lieutenant Benjamin H. Hodgson has been seen more than once around the battlefield. One student intern staying at the house reported falling asleep on a sofa only to wake later in the night with an overwhelming sense of dread. She opened her eyes to the sight of vision of a man with a handlebar mustache sitting at a table looking distraught. After a few moments, the vision of the man disappeared. Later, as she toured the battlefield with another researcher, she said she was drawn to the memorial to Lieutenant Hodgson. When back at the visitor center, her colleague showed her a photograph of the lieutenant, and she realized it was the same man she had seen at the table the night before. Ex-Guide James Thompson reported years back, "We have some blood-stained clothing from the soldiers who were killed here. We keep it in a vault. I was looking it over one day. My scalp started to prickle. I felt a surge of sheer terror and despair going through me. I'm convinced that I was getting a psychic echo of some soldier." Park Ranger Al Jacobson and his wife Florence lived in an apartment in the old stone house, which is right on the edge of the battlefield cemetery and in the middle of the battlefield. Before Al and Florence moved in, they had heard stories from some of the local Indians that the place was haunted. They scoffed, but now they're not so sure. We've been in a room when we saw the doorknob twist open, but there was no one at the door, and there have been unexplained footsteps. One night I was showing some home movies and our apartment upstairs was empty. I distinctly heard footsteps cross the floor in the apartment. I ran upstairs, but there was no one there. No one could have got out except by the stairs which I came up. The strange tales of sightings and unnatural occurrences have never stopped at the site and continue on to this day. A shaggy buffalo bull bounded out from a neighboring hollow, and close behind him came a slender Indian boy, riding without stirrups or saddle, and lashing his eager little horse to full speed. Yard after yard he drew closer to his gigantic victim, though the bull, with his short tail erect and his tongue lolling out a foot from his foaming jaws, was straining his unwieldy strength to the utmost. A moment more, and the boy was close alongside of him. It was our friend Hailstorm. He dropped the rein on his horse's neck and jerked an arrow like lightning from the quiver at his shoulder. There, he has given it to him, and there goes another. You feel well now, old bull, don't you? With 2 arrows stuck in your lights? There, he has given him another. Hear how the Hailstorm yells when he shoots. The bull sprang again and again at his assailant, but the horse kept dodging with wonderful celerity. At length, the bull followed up his attack with a furious rush, and Hailstorm was put to flight, the shaggy monster following close behind. The boy clung in his seat like a leech, and secure in the speed of his little pony, looked round toward us and laughed. In a moment he was again alongside of the bull, who was now driven to complete desperation. His eyeballs glared through his tangled mane, and the blood flew from his mouth and nostrils. Thus, still battling with each other, the 2 enemies disappeared over the hill. Many of the Indians rode at full gallop toward the spot. We followed at a more moderate pace, and soon saw the bull lying dead on the side of the hill. The Indians were gathered around him, and several knives were already at work. These little instruments were plied with such wonderful address that the twisted sinews were cut apart. The ponderous bones fell asunder as if by magic, and in a moment the vast carcass was reduced to a heap of bloody ruins. The surrounding group of savages offered no very attractive spectacle to a civilized eye. Some were cracking the huge thigh bones and devouring the marrow within. Others were cutting away pieces of the liver and other approved morsels, and swallowing them on the spot with the appetite of wolves. The faces of most of them, besmeared with blood from ear to ear, looked grim and horrible enough. My friend White Shield proffered me a marrow bone so skillfully laid open that all the rich substance within was exposed to view at once. Another Indian held out a large piece of the delicate lining of the paunch, but these courteous offerings I begged leave to decline. I noticed one little boy who was very busy with his knife about the jaws and throat of the buffalo, from which he extracted some morsel of peculiar delicacy. It is but fair to say that only certain parts of the animal are considered eligible in these extempore banquets. The Indians would look with abhorrence on anyone who should partake indiscriminately of the newly killed carcass. Francis Parkman.